Well, after achieving the playoffs in their first season up in the Championship after promotion from League One in 2022, Sunderland dropped to a 16th place finish last season in a campaign of regression for the Black Cats. I think the Tony Mowbray appointment was something to steady the ship after, after Alex Neil left. But while Tony Mowbray did an incredible job to get them into the playoffs, in spite of a spate of injuries, both in defence and in attack, there seemed to be some disagreements between Tony Mowbray and the board in terms of the recruitment policy, which is Mowbray seemed to want a bit more of a balance between youth and experience, and the board want a solely youth-centered approach, which has been reflected in all of their additions really since they took charge under Kirill Dreyfus. So where does Sunderland go from here? Can they find that balance, or is it just a question of can they win anything with kids? That's the big question really under their new head coach Reggie Libri. But they've got a very high potential squad. So can they make progress from last season's 16th place finish and possibly change the feeling from fans around the club, which wasn't always in a great place last season? Plenty to discuss then in this summer deep dive. Yes, welcome along to the latest EFL Debate Summer Deep Dive, one of 72 we're doing club by club across the EFL between mid-June and mid-July. Already the full set for League 2 uploaded to YouTube and to Spotify, a few for League 1 as well, so you can go and subscribe. For now, I'm delighted to be joined by Jonny Hawley from the Roker Report. Jonny, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. Really appreciate your time to talk about the Black Cats. So, thanks for joining me. How can Sunderland win something with kids this season?
Well, good question. I think, look, in terms of like actually winning something, as in can we challenge for the title? I think the answer is no. I think that would be certainly a bridge too far at this stage. You know, like you mentioned in the sort of preamble, obviously we finished 16th last season, which, you know, definitely a drop off. Maybe not as much of a regression possibly as it looks on paper, because I think the 6th place finished the season before was something of an anomaly really, and it was a much more difficult league last season. I think we can certainly improve. There's plenty of room in which to improve. Plenty of the table we can climb, but I do think we've still got the nucleus of a really good squad. We've got talented players. And now that we do finally have a head coach in place and, you know, pre-season's kind of underway in earnest, I think we're in a much more stable position to build on this season. So I think we can definitely we can be looking up the table rather than down, I would think. As to how high we can ultimately finish, I think, you know, we could make a run for the playoffs, but I would think anything beyond that is really asking quite a lot.
Jonny, when I've had you on the podcast before, the conversation has been that the club has got to compromise its recruitment policy and just add, one or two experienced heads. But I almost feel like it's got to the stage now where it's kind of a redundant question, because we can talk about that all day long, but at the end of the day, the club with its current processes just aren't going to do that. So it feels almost like a redundant question now, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, certainly. You know, you just look at the list of names that have come in and gone out the door over the past few windows in the last few years, and the picture's obvious. You know, they want young players, they want young talent. They're not going to hold on to older, arguably more experienced heads if they feel like they can bring in somebody who's younger and has more potential. And obviously, there's pitfalls and advantages to any transfer strategy. This one's no different. We've seen some of the advantages with the performances of, you know, your Jack Clarks, Ahmad when we had him on loan a couple of seasons ago. We've brought in, you know, unheard of players like Trey Hume, who's been certainly a success. We've brought through players through the academy, your Dan Neils, your Chris Riggs. So again, plenty to look at as a success. But then the other side of that coin is, you know, your Nazari Rusins, Lewis Semedo's, basically anybody we've signed to try and play up front for the past 2 seasons has just been a disaster, really, in terms of goals scored. So, yeah, in terms of this season, I do think there's possible signs that they might be willing to tweak it a little bit. Now,
Okay.
I don't think that means that we're going to see a majority or even many signings, over the age of, say, 23, 24. But I think there have been noises from Labrie since he's come in, and just wordings of statements. And, we signed Simon Moore, who's I think he's 34 years old, as a backup goalkeeper. Now, is a backup goalkeeper the most important signing to judge a transfer policy off? Possibly not. I would accept that. But I think there is scope for maybe just a little sprinkling of it, whereas over the past couple of years, it has very much been sort of 100-0 in terms of young to old signings coming in. So I think it's going to be more of the same in the main, with possibly a bit of a tweak, but I wouldn't expect to see anything radical.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with that. Reggie Labrie, I've not actually, Jonny, had much of a chance to look into him as a manager. I think he was relegated with his previous club in France, but he's probably been appointed based on stylistic and developmental ideals.
Yeah, so he had quite a long career coaching in the youth academy before he then stepped up to take the role with the first team. And he did well in his first season. I think they finished 10th.
Right.
I think it was 10th, but whatever it was either the highest finish in the French top flight ever, or the highest finish, since, the last 30, 40 years or whatever it is. And then obviously everything went a bit sour in the second season. He got relegated, and it's not ideal to have a relegation on your CV, particularly with it being your most recent job. But you only need to look at David Moyes and how he changed his career after he got relegated with us in the Premier League. Obviously, European silverware at West Ham, so it doesn't necessarily define.
I know your fans were so happy for him when he won the Europa Conference League.
Delighted for him. Yeah. I wish nothing but fantastic things for David Moyes' career, as I'm sure you can imagine. Yeah. But yeah, definitely in terms of the youth coaching aspect of his CV, I think that would be a massive green flag for our board and Christian Speakman when they were looking to bring in a head coach. Yeah, for sure.
I don't want to. I know it's such a cliche, isn't it, that he speaks well in interviews and that kind of thing. But I'm just wondering, what sort of an impression has he made in his early media appearances with the club?
Certainly, from a personal point of view, I think he's handled himself really well. He's doesn't seem to be the sort of fieriest character in the world. He's quite reserved and quite calm. I mean, we'll see if he's still calm if we go on a bad run of form. But no, I thought he handled himself well. He sort of had to bat away a couple of questions that were trying to pry into, are you bringing staff over from France? Things like that, like questions into the recruitment, which obviously every manager or head coach is going to get those questions, but he sort of gave an answer without really giving an answer, sort of thing, which is... obviously an important skill.
Which is fair. I always think media outlets don't really have a right to know what's going on that isn't official. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I think, once something becomes official, then that's the time to talk about it. So I think Labrie was within his rights to sort of...
It's sort of like they have to ask and he has to not really answer. It's just part of the game, isn't it, to a degree. But I thought he handled it well. He spoke about how he wants his style of play to involve sort of pressing high up the pitch, and how he wants to have I think he mentioned specifically about, sometimes you just want to see 6, 7, 8 passes and that's it. And you're up the pitch. You don't want to necessarily see, sort of 100 passes for the sake of it. Which is, I think, something that will chime well with a lot of Sunderland fans, because I think as a fan base, we tend to appreciate managers more who play a more direct style of football. You only need to look at Sam Allardyce's brief time here in the Premier League to see how well we took to him, whereas certain other clubs, a black and white one up the road in particular, weren't really big fans of him. So I think that stands him in good stead. And he spoke about obviously needing to be pragmatic, and he's sort of not promising the world early doors, which again, that would be just as bad as sort of coming out and giving away your transfer secret. You don't want to be coming and saying, I'm going to get us into the Premier League, I'm going to win the Championship, because you're just setting yourself up for failure there. You can't win. So yeah, reserved, a little bit quiet, but his English was good. Again, a bit of a cliche whenever a foreign manager comes in, is sort of, how is his English? Can he communicate with the players? So yeah, not much to go off, but the early signs are good.
Yeah, well, that's all you could ask for at this stage. Where do you feel the club are at on a structural level, Jonny, from an ownership point of view? Because I suppose the not to put too fine a point on it, but the handling of the whole fan zone thing with the Newcastle game and all that was a little bit of a farce, I guess. Do you think lessons have been learnt?
Well, they've certainly told us that they've learned lessons, which, whether that's necessarily true, obviously can sort of remain to be seen. But having said that, they replaced, I forget the exact name of the role, but basically there was a guy, Steve Davison, was effectively in charge of all of the commercial side, as I understand it. He's since been replaced by, I think David Bruce is the new guy's name, and he's brokered the new kit deal with Hummel, which has gone down an absolute storm amongst the fan base. It's the most universally loved kit I've ever seen. And I think it's a solid 10 out of 10. But sort of Hummel made a lot of Sunderland kits back in the 80s, and there's a lot of fond memories for people when different club legends played in those kits. So I think that is actually a solid bit of progress where you can sort of point to that and say, look, they obviously made mistakes. More than mistakes. I mean, it was a horrendous error of judgment. Everything that went on around that whole Newcastle, the whole game really was just descended into farce, like you say. But then bringing in a kit supplier that is universally loved by the fans, they've basically moved the club shop to a better location. They've reopened that, and they had like a big sort of opening day thing with the kit launch. And just like little touches, they had sort of people bringing around cakes, pink slices for the fans in the queues and stuff, which they're actual tangible things where you can look at them and say, yeah, okay, maybe they have learned a lesson, because that level of fan engagement, and I hate calling it customer service because I don't like thinking of supporters as customers, but that is important, especially in this day and age where you're almost fighting for every fan. From a young age, you want to sort of get them in the door as early as possible, and making that whole experience, all the retail side of things, improving that, I think it speaks volumes about what has actually changed behind the scenes, which is positive to see, because, for a lot of fans, they've still got a lot of making up to do for what went on last season, both that individual incident of the Black Cats bar, but also, the managerial processes, the hiring and firing of Michael Beale, all the sort of everything that tanked that second half of the season. They've got a lot of making up to do in a lot of people's eyes, and it's a good first step, basically.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can actually forgive the Michael Beale appointment that has proven to be a bit of a mistake, but I could understand why they went for him, because he did have a great sort of coaching record. I could see why they went for him in the first place. Just didn't turn out to be the right person. What do you think of Kirill Louis-Dreyfus, the majority shareholder and the chairman?
Yeah, for me personally, I think not an unblemished record. Obviously, there have been things that he's got wrong, as any owner, any person in any job in the world. You're going to make mistakes, and you're going to come a cropper sometimes. But for me, I think he's been a breath of fresh air for the club. He's got a very clear vision, a very clear plan, which we've briefly spoken about the transfer policy. You can see it's sort of reflected there in the way that the coaching setup and the football side of the club's been structured, the emphasis on the academy and the investment there since he's come in, which to me they're all positive things. You're never going to complain about an owner who has a very, very clear and structured way of working, because the alternative, which you see it, too many clubs, especially lower down the football league, is a bit chaotic and a bit, people don't really know where they stand sort of day to day, month to month. So I think in that sense, he's been very good. Obviously, since he's come in, we've risen up a division, which that's at the end of the day, we're a football club, so the football is going to be the most important thing, and we're playing at a higher level. Obviously, not the level that everybody sort of aspires to be at. That's obviously the Premier League, where we were until 2017. But I think he's done a good job. Again, he's obviously made mistakes, and he'll continue to make mistakes. But I think there's a bit of a vocal minority of fans, I would say, particularly on social media. I mean, you know what Twitter can be like. It brings out the worst in people. There's quite a loud minority who like to sort of berate every decision and every statement, and, pick over the wording of every single tweet that the club puts out. But I think in the main, I would say in the main, he's got the support of most fans. And certainly personally, I think he's done a really good job so far, and long may it continue.
Happy with Christian Speakman as sporting director?
No, that's a slightly thornier question in the Sunderland fan base. Personally, I'm happy with him. Again, mistakes have been made. You look at the second half of last season, you look at the failure to bring in a striker, a proper recognised, goal scorer for, a number of windows now, which is obviously a concern and it does need addressing. But I think, again, in the main, you look at what I always come back to is you look at where we were when these people came in and where we are now, and we're absolutely worlds apart. I mean, when Christian Speakman came in, and some of the squads we had in League One, you look at the names now. Sometimes people will put them in like the group chat on WhatsApp and they'll be like, "Oh God, you remember this game a few years ago?" And you look at the list of players and you just like, you want to be sick. It's awful. So some of these players. Oh God, yeah, Phil Parkinson, and I mean, don't make us think about it again. But you look at that as the situation, the state of play when they came in, and you look at now we've got people who are wanting to chuck 20, 30 million quid at us for different members of the squad. I think the value of the squad really, if we were to have a fire sale and sell every single player this summer, I think we get 150 million there or thereabouts probably in total in fees for everybody, which is and what we've spent is such a small fraction of that. It's not like we've spent 150 million quid to assemble that squad. We've spent pennies on a lot of the players. I mean, again, Trey Hume's a good example, a couple of 100,000 quid from Northern Ireland. And there's been rumoured interest from clubs in the Europa League. Aston Villa was supposedly monitoring him. So if you're the sporting director, then obviously your remit is the football side. Now, yes, performances last season were poor and certain things behind the scenes didn't seem to be quite right. But you just look at it in black and white and you look at the squad as it was and as it is now.
In red and white.
Sorry, red and white, yeah. Bloody, I don't want to be mentioning them again. But
careful, Jonny.
But yeah, you look at what he's done in terms of transforming that playing squad, and I think you can't argue with it. The results are clear for everybody to see, and if we have to have a slow 6 months here and there where maybe something doesn't quite go right with a coaching appointment, or we maybe don't quite get who the top targets are in the transfer window, I think I'm willing to accept that when looking at the bigger picture and thinking that we're on a general trend of progress. So as long as that's continuing, I think you've got to appreciate the job he's done. Yeah. But that's my opinion, and there's a lot of Sunderland fans who would be sharpening the pitchforks at me saying that right now. So a controversial one.
Controversial, yeah. I agree with you, Jonny. I think I do kind of question certain parts of the recruitment policy and whether things could do with being compromised and just rebalanced a little bit, but not by much, because I do think that, like you say, it's just oozing with potential, this squad, everywhere you look. Even if you go down to the under-21s where there's a goalkeeper like Matty Young who's supposed to be this incredible prospect, and it's literally everywhere you look. It's not even that the players that are starting right now. It's there's so much potential at Sunderland, and I know that's got to be fulfilled. I know you've got to find the right sort of blueprint on the pitch, but I do feel like you're getting there, and it's just those little tweaks that's going to be the difference.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's a good point that you bring up about the under-21 side as well and the under-18s. I mean, Chris Riggs, sort of the standout name. He was starting games for us at 16 last season, which that's obviously going to be a success story, isn't it? No matter who you are or what club you're at, if you get into the first team at that age, you're doing something right.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of names, like you say, Matty Young. There's Tommy Watson, who's a young winger. I think he's just still only 18 years old. And from what I've seen from the pre-season sort of social media posts, he's kind of in and amongst the first team group now. So there's another name to watch out for coming off the sort of production line, which isn't something as a Sunderland fan we've really been able to say many times, certainly since I've been watching us. I mean, we've had the odd name come through, Jordan Henderson or Jordan Pickford, obviously the sort of big
of
examples of the massive success stories. But beyond that, it really has been slim pickings. We've had people make 5 or 6 appearances off the bench and then fade away and go down the leagues. So to be in a position where we have got such a massively sort of well-stocked academy setup, I think is a massive testament to the work that has been done behind the scenes by obviously Kieran Louis-Dreyfus and Christian Speakman being the sort of names at the top of that hierarchy. But you credit everybody down there. Every member of staff behind the scenes is obviously putting the work in and getting the rewards, which is fantastic to see.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Given how audacious the club can be with its progression plan, you mentioned Tommy Watson there. Is he going to be? I've heard, I think it was Adam Guest who tweeted me a few weeks ago saying he's very similar to Jack Clark, who's also on the left.
Yeah.
Could we expect Tommy Watson to be the understudy to Jack Clark this season and be coming off the bench a bit, and they've been trusting him to be part of the squad almost?
Yeah, if he's got the talent, then absolutely, without a doubt, because the club have proven, through actions rather than words, that if you're good enough, you're old enough in this team.
Yeah.
And from the limited amounts that I have seen of him, whether it's in age group football or what have you, he does look a very similar player to Jack Clark. He's even just like visually, you watch the way he dribbles and runs at people, it just looks like Clark, which obviously isn't the most scientific method of judging a player, but I think he does look a very good prospect. And with him having that similar profile, whether it's an understudy role or whether it's potentially slightly more involved if Jack Clark does move on this summer, which is obviously a sort of big elephant in the room when we're
I think it would be a bit cavalier to have him as first choice, but
yes.
you've got Jurison Bennett there, who I think was on loan or out on loan last season.
Yes.
Whether you think he'd be ready to step up if Clark left?
He's a funny one because when he's actually made appearances off the bench or whatever in the Championship, he has actually looked quite good. He scored in a 2-2 draw against Watford a couple of seasons ago. He sort of did. It was the weirdest skill move I've ever seen. He sort of did like 2 or 3 pirouettes in a row and then stood across up into the box against Southampton for Chris Rigg to score early last season. But then he does that off the bench and you think, wow, pacey, direct, likes to get a ball in the box. And then we sign a load of strikers who are shorter than me and then send them off on loan to Greece. It doesn't make sense. So I think there's a player in there from what I've seen. And he looks like the kind of player who'd be quite exciting. He's very raw. He's clearly like he needs some refinement, which will come through time. It'll come through experience and obviously working with him on the training pitch. So if you were just asking us based off ability, if I think he'll get a run this season, I think he's good enough.
Yeah.
But then you've got to say that possibly does it speak volumes that a few coaches in a row have not really seen fit to use him that much? Possibly. Yeah. It's hard to say when you don't see what goes on behind closed doors, what happens on the training pitch and what have you. But for me, I would certainly like to see him given an increased role this season because I think he can do it. And I think he offers us something a bit different because he's a left-footed left winger, whereas obviously, basically every other winger that we've got, Jack Clark and Patrick Roberts, prime examples, sort of like playing on the wrong side almost and inverting, which is obviously, I mean, wingers are, everyone's doing that these days, but in Bennett, I think we do have somebody who could be a different option and somebody who could maybe try and sort of unlock a stubborn defence if he's coming on against tired legs. The last thing you want to see as a fullback 75 minutes in is somebody fresh with bags of pace coming on to square up against you, so I would, but as to whether we will see more of him, it's a little bit more up in the air. I think if he's still here and he's not on loan by the time the window ends, then I think definitely we will, because that'd be a big show of faith. But yeah, watch this space.
Jack Clark then, Jonny, do you think the club should be holding out for 30 million for him?
I think we should, yeah. When you see the prices that players are moving for, I know he's not 18, but you look at Archie Gray going to Tottenham. I think what was that in the end? I think it's potentially up to 40 million with add-ons, maybe somewhere between 30 and 40 anyway. And he's an 18-year-old who, now I guess he looks a player, but he's not got the experience. Obviously he's got the potential, but Jack Clark's been for a couple of seasons now a very, very good performer. Even last season in a really poor team at times, where even when we were scraping some results, it was almost more just like give the ball to Clark and pray at times.
I think what it is though, Jonny, is what with someone like Archie Gray, there's a very specific time frame where a player can go to reaching that absolute elite level. I think Archie Gray has that potential.
Yeah.
I'm not sure you're ever going to see Jack Clark starting for a Champions League winning side. Whereas I think Archie Gray does have that potential, and that potential or that age difference of a few years can make a massive difference in terms of value.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's the same kind of logic as to why I've been seeing talk around Joe Bellingham maybe being like attracting interest from Premier League clubs.
Yeah.
And I think that's a similar argument with Archie Gray, where you say, look, he's only 18, so who knows, the sky could be the limit. Whereas with Clark, I think you're right. Like, we're never going to see Jack Clark starting for England. You know, he's not that player, as much as I love him. But I just think with the way that the market is at the moment, he's still quite young. He's not, he's not hot prospect age, but he's still a young player. He's English, which automatically adds money onto your value when you're moving sort of domestically, because obviously the sort of quotas for homegrown players and all that. So I do think 30 million should be sort of the magic number. If we get a 30 million pound offer, then shake hands and off you pop. Thanks for everything, Jack, but good luck with the next step. Anything below that, I'd hope they would have a sort of long, hard think. And at that point, it would more be judging, right, okay, what can we get to replace him if we do sell him? It should be the calculation for me. It shouldn't just be a sort of arbitrary, like, oh, they've offered 25, so let's let him go. It should be, can we invest this well enough to replace what Jack Clark gives this squad? Because if the answer is no, and we sell him, and then what comes in maybe is, a couple of 18-year-olds and not really anything else, that's when alarm bells would ring for me, and we'd be looking down rather than up. So I also think the interest seems to have cooled a little bit because he tailed off a bit towards the back end of the season and then picked up an injury. So I do wonder whether that could almost help us.
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I'm not sure clubs are going to go above 25.
I mean, 25, look, you're splitting hairs a little bit between 25 and 30 million. Obviously, it's £5 million. It's a lot of money, but 25 million could still a hell of a lot for a championship footballer. I just think that with the money that's sloshing around the Premier League, if he was to go to a Crystal Palace or a Brentford or even a West Ham, somebody like that, we know they've got the money, they can afford it. So I think we'd be daft not to hold out. But we have shown that we can be quite hard-nosed in negotiations under the current regime. So I worry just because it's Sunderland and I'm used to getting let down. But I do think based on what they've shown us that they are sort of willing to like mix it with the big boys a bit and be a bit harsher and a bit more ruthless in negotiations. So I'm not overly worried about it. It's still just that little fear of the unknown of if he goes, what if the next guy's not as good? What if we regress and then you're sort of back to square one again?
You are. So where was I? Goalkeepers then. Anthony Patterson. How important do you think he's going to be this season?
Yeah, I think he's going to be really important. I think Weasley gets a little bit too much stick, I think, at times from certain sections of the fan base, which I think you see it a lot when young players come through the academy at Sunderland, where some people sort of perceive that academy graduates are given too much leeway, so then they kind of go the other way and nitpick them a little bit, which, I personally don't agree with. I think he's a great keeper. And I think until right at the end of the season, where I think he got dropped for the final game, I think he'd started 100 plus games in the league for us, in a row without missing a game. So that shows you his importance. And to do that at such I think what is he now? I think he might be 25 now, Patterson, 24, 25. So still quite young for a goalkeeper, really, to have that level of experience in League One and the Championship. So I think he's going to be important. Obviously, we brought in Simon Moore to be effectively just his backup.
Well, I think the Simon Moore signing helps, although I think he would be a good backup for Championship level, is allowing Matty Young to go out on loan. And I'm wondering, he did so well in the National League North last season with Darlington. Could Sunderland, I'm not involved in the loan progression, could Sunderland loan him out to League Two possibly rather than the National League next season?
Yeah, obviously from everything that we've heard from the reports from when he was at Darlington last season, then obviously he was, they loved him and he was ripping it up. So I agree. I think it would be a surprise to me if we did loan him to the National League, because I don't know how much you learn about him as a footballer, and I don't know how much you push him to develop if he it's quite snobbish to say it that way, but if he only goes to that level. Whereas I think if he goes to League Two, then it's just a different kettle of fish, isn't it? It's the football league, it's the professional game. The pressure does ratchet up. You've got, especially with the new broadcast deal, presumably you'd get a few games on telly, which would be another experience, and bigger stadiums, bigger fan bases. I think I agree that I think Simon Moore has basically come in as a bit of experience, a backup, and to sort of unblock that pathway for Young to get experience this season, because it does nobody any favours if he's sat on our bench for 46 games watching Patterson between the sticks.
Exactly. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you, Jonny, about three defenders and kind of how they're going to work alongside each other. Because what really interests me is you got Trihume, who I think plays like a kind of inverted fullback role, where in possession he kind of drops it. Drifts into midfield, if you like, but then you've also got Luke O'Nien, who I think because of that can sort of become like a bit like an outside centre back in midfield. And then you've got somebody like Adji Elise, if he can stay fit this season, or possibly Niall Huggins, who might be able to sort of tuck in on the left of the back three. So I just wanted to talk to you about the dynamics of the defence, really.
Yeah, Huggins, I think his days as a Sunderland footballer are basically over. Really, I think his injury last season was a really bad one, and I don't think it's going to work out for him, which is unfortunate because I thought he looked good last season when he was fit. And there's obviously a reason that he was at Leeds and then he's been at Sunderland. There's clearly a talented player in there, but I just think his body can handle it, which is a real shame, both obviously for him personally and for us, because it means that we lose an option at the back. But with regards to the others, I do think it's interesting this season what's going to happen with the defence, because we saw towards the end of the season that Timothy Pembele was getting some minutes finally. It's sort of been the sort of invisible man since he joined last summer. And he looked quite good. I was impressed with him, really. And I wonder whether we might even see us deploy a sort of back three, back five at times this season, and then you could have Pembele playing as a sort of wing back. Then maybe you have Trihume tucking in and playing right of the three, which I think suits his game a bit more because he's so good defensively. I mean, he almost never loses a sort of one-on-one or a
He's
duel.
so tenacious as well, isn't he?
Oh yeah, he loves a tackle. You can tell he gets so much just enjoyment out of it. So I think that would possibly suit the two of them. And otherwise, I don't really see how you get them both in the same team, because obviously, if you play a four, they can't both play right back. And I don't see as a centre half.
I guess what I would wonder about that is the big. If we look at the big areas of strength of the Sunderland team, it's Joe Bellingham, and when he's given the freedom to push on from midfield. Currently, we don't know if Jack Clark's going to stay, but right now you would say it's your wide forwards, Patrick Robertson, Jack Clark. So those are your big areas of strength. Now so if you played three at the back, that would mean that either you sacrifice Joe Bellingham or you play as a false nine, which you can do, but I'm not as sure about that. So you play him as part of a two-man midfield, or which might restrict him a little bit, or you play a 3-5-2, which doesn't really suit, because you've not really got any great strikers who you'd build around, and you'd be sacrificing your wide forwards, which are one of the stronger areas of the squad. So that would be my question over the back three. I'm not sure that suits the personnel that you've got.
I think it's a completely valid point. I do think we would, if we did play that system, I think you could find a way to fit in the wide forwards. I think you just maybe tuck them in a little bit, because they like to come inside anyway, and then you've got the wing backs providing the width is one option. But I do think the balance of the midfield, like the central, the sort of holding players there, would be a concern. So I would be surprised if we played a 3 or a 5 like sort of regularly, as in like that's our go-to formation. But I do think it's something that, I mean, Mike Dodd's played it a couple of times in games against Leeds, and I think he played it against West Brom as well, but I could be wrong on that one. But we played it sort of games where we were not really the favourites, and we used it to get a result. And I think it would be a good option to sort of have in the locker to pull out when you need it. But I do agree, though. I think the balance of the side generally we're probably going to see a 4. Without having seen Labrie actually pick a team yet, even for pre-season.
We don't know what formation he's going to like. I personally think the squad lends itself most naturally to a 4-3-3. Because I would also maybe advocate for the idea of you got Dan Neil in midfield, who again has done really well, especially with the amount of responsibility that's been placed on him. You've got Joe Bellingham there for now. We don't know if you're going to cash in on him, but do you think maybe one more experienced midfielder could be needed this summer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think without question, because even though he didn't really play much at this level for us, Corey Evans was actually the club captain and was a key part in getting out of League One. And he played that sort of the 6 role, or whatever people are calling it now. That sort of sitting in front of the back 4 water carrier position. Nothing too flash, nothing too fancy, but it's an important role. And as much as anything, I think you need a consistent sort of voice in that middle of the pitch who's able to organise people around them, has the discipline to hold the position. And I think it's really important in terms of where you set your sort of your defensive line as well, is like how high or how deep you want to be. A lot of that can come from whoever it is who's sitting in front of the defenders. They can dictate that as the game ebbs and flows a little bit, I think. So definitely we need somebody there, because we've got Dan Neil, we've got Pierre Ekwa, we've got Job who can play there, we've got Chris Rigg can play like in the proper central midfield position. They're all and they're all talented. They've all got, plenty of ability and potential, but we don't actually have anybody who currently just naturally plays that more defensive, more organised role. And we've all been, as a fan base, we've been crying out for it for probably 12 to 18 months now, really.
Yeah.
So I would certainly say that's a priority.
Ideally, it would be someone who can also collect the ball off the defence and get things moving and keep things moving.
Yeah. You don't just want somebody who's going to play 5-yard passes all game, because you're not going to add much to your 11. But it's a role that I think Dan Neil could play at some point in his career. I just don't think he's that player right now. I think it's possibly one of the roles where we might need to flex a bit on the model. And bring in somebody who's just got a bit more experience. It doesn't need to be somebody on the wrong side of 30, but somebody who knows the position, knows the role, doesn't need to learn on the job, as it were, because it's such a key position to get right. If you win the midfield battle, you win the game more often than not.
Unless, Jonny, you feel like, by the way, I agree. I think last season you really did need an experienced midfielder, and I think that was one of the reasons why you dropped down. Yeah. But I'm almost wondering now that, having got to this point, is Dan Neil going to be experienced enough as a number 6 and have learned enough about the defensive side of things and what's required that he might actually be better at that next season, and actually you might not end up needing a number 6?
Well, it'll certainly be better, like off the back of the experience of last season, because there were times either literally he was having to hold in there on his own, as it like we changed the formation around him, or maybe his partner wasn't having a good game, so he was sort of having to hold it together himself anyway, to varying levels of success. Let's be fair. But I think you waste a bit of what makes Dan Neil so good if you limit him to that role, because I think at this level especially, I think Dan Neil will go on to play Premier League football. You
think he's an 8 for the medium term?
Yes, I think he's an 8, because I think he does offer you, his range of passing's phenomenal. He's very tenacious in the challenge. So I think if you get him in a position where he's able to get up and down the pitch and contribute more going forward, I do think that's how we get the best out of him for where we're at this season. Like I say, going forward, I think it's entirely possible that, I think he'll play Premier League football. I think he's good enough. Yeah. And I think you could easily see him fitting into a 3-man Premier League midfield and playing that deeper role, and maybe, sort of not playing within himself, but not necessarily needing to get about the pitch as much and focus more on that job. I just don't think that's what we need at this moment in time from him.
Yeah, it's so funny. I think the number 6 is one of the hardest roles to recruit for in football, because it's like so much goes into it. You've got to have the confidence to be able to collect the ball off the defence, and maybe the agility to turn a press and be press resistant, the intelligence, ideally be able to ping a pass to the flanks, also ideally have some defensive discipline, also be able to cover ground, also be able to be good enough physics. It's like there's so much that goes into it.
Yeah, just find us a list of 5 or 6 of them to recruit with you, Christian. It's easy, mate. Just sort it out.
Absolutely, it's a very difficult one. So I do have sympathy with the club from that regard, because I think it's really tough to find a quality 6. England, for example, like you look at England,
well, they miss Calvin Phillips. Just bring Calvin Phillips in.
Yeah. Joe Bellingham, how good can he be?
He can be as good as he wants to be, basically. I think he's got the tools. I do think he suffered a lot of times last season through basically being overplayed. I don't think he was helped by... He was a lot of time... And it didn't help him because I think it possibly was fatiguing him a little bit. I also think it opens him up to too much criticism, because there were times, and I mean, I was criticising it as well at points last season where you're watching a game and you're seeing us go behind or just completely lack any cutting edge going forward. And everybody's playing poor. Like the whole midfield's having a bad game, basically. But then every week, Job stays on and Ekwa comes off or Neil comes off or, Patrick Roberts comes off or whoever. And everything changes around him, but he's always there until the 90th minute. And I don't think it helps
it's like Jonny,
to have that scrutiny.
Do you know what, though, Jonny? I think it's a really interesting point because Tony Mowbray did this really well. I'm sure there were games in the playoff season where, like, Amad Diallo would be dropped for a random game and he's thinking, wow, and people will be saying, why has he done that? But actually, it's probably good squad management if you look at the big picture, because it's like you're keeping players fresh, you're protecting your players a little bit, you're keeping them on your toes, you're also shuffling the pack and giving other players a chance. So I think that's good squad management. So it'd be really interesting to see what the selection policy is of Reggie Labrie. But yeah, I think Joe Bellingham, if he stays, is going to be Sunderland's key player because there's just no getting around that. He is that good, along with Jack Clark and Dan Neil and the rest of it. But yeah, I think
I think it says a lot that he was our top scorer last season at 18 years of age. You know what I mean? Like, I know he only got 7 goals, but 7 goals from, I was going to say central midfield. I mean, he played sort of anywhere from central midfield all the way through to false 9. But to get 7 goals in the Championship at 18 years of age as primarily a midfielder, not many people do that because A, they're not good enough to get in the team in the first place, or B, they do get in the team and they're not good enough to make that impact on the pitch. So I think he gets possibly a little bit of unfair criticism at times. He is frustrating. He's inconsistent at times. He blows a bit hot and cold, but he's 18. Like most 18-year-olds are going to be a bit inconsistent. That's the nature of the beast when you're dealing with youth. So I think he needs a more settled squad around him, obviously, and he needs continuity in the coaching staff behind the scenes. And I do think it's an opportunity to get the best out of him and for him to really sort of step up a level this season, because it didn't help him that we were chopping and changing him from 8 to 10 to false 9, and then mid-game kind of he's in a 2 and then he's in a 3 and then he's, it doesn't help anyone, but again, particularly such a young player.
Sure.
You want to set them up for success as far as possible, and part of that does not include chopping and changing the team every 25 minutes and losing 7 games in a row, whatever we were doing at the back end of last season. So
no, that makes a lot of sense. So it sounds like from a midfield point of view, the priority should be to get the right number 6 in, maybe move Dan Neil into a number 8 role, and Bellingham is sort of your number 10 or your most attacking midfielder. He's one who can do real damage, isn't he? And I quite like that. So go on.
I was just going to say there's stiff competition there as well, because I mean we've got Job, we've got Chris Rigg, obviously, who was just signed. I think it's a 3-year professional contract.
That's brilliant news, by the way, because Chris Rigg is one of the I think one of the best players of his age group in the world, you could argue.
Absolutely, I think he's the England age group captain. Being obviously rumoured to be, courted by them up the road. Manchester United supposedly keeping tabs on him, so a big show of confidence in Labrie as well, because he's waited until Labrie came in to actually sign the contract and then it was announced. So I think that's a huge statement from the club to get that one signed, sealed and delivered.
Do you think Chris Rigg could be in for a big season, big breakout season this year?
I think so. I think because we've got him, we've got Job, we've got Adil Oshish who can play that 10 role. So between the 3 of them, there's plenty of competition. But again, particularly Rigg and Job, they're so young that we're not going to want to see them burned out and ran into the ground playing 46 in a row, 90 minutes every game. So I think that position is going to be one where we will see a bit more rotation, a bit more license to make those, 60, 70-minute substitutions and, give them a chance against tired legs. So I'll be interested to see what Labrie does in terms of his actual selections. But I think that is a position where we have quite a luxury, really, of having a few very talented, quite different players who none of them are going to necessarily get the hump if they're not starting every week.
Sure.
Whereas if you bring in a big money number 9, they're going to expect to be on that team sheet and playing 90 minutes near enough every game.
Yeah.
Whereas I think we're blessed really to have a group of a few players there who I think we can afford to be a bit more flexible with, and it'll help get the best out of them as well in return, because they've, if you're having a bit of a spell, just sit on the bench for a couple of games and sort of get your mojo back without having to be in the spotlight 90 minutes a week in front of 40,000 brain madams.
I've just had a mad idea, Jonny. You might completely lose respect for me after I've given you this idea. What if Clark and Roberts were super attacking wing backs, and then you had Joe Bellingham and Chris Rigg as your two number 10s? You had Dan Neil and another number 6 coming in, so like a 3-4-2-1 with a box formation, and then super attacking wing backs.
It's actually not as mad as it sounds, because Clark has played wing back for us a handful of times, almost in a sort of Bukayo Saka type way, where it's a bit of necessity and a bit like we don't really want to do it, but he's generally done all right when he has played there. Like, he's obviously at his best when he's playing higher up the pitch and gets the ball sort of in that final third and he can do the damage. But it isn't the most insane thing I've ever heard. I do think, though, starting a game of football with Patrick Roberts at wing back is asking for a lot of bad things to happen to your goal.
Maybe Pembele at wing back then.
Yeah.
Interesting. Okay, I'll just throwing that one out there. Striker then, Jonny. You've got Elisa Mienda. Yeah, you've got Elisa Mienda there, who was brought in 12 months ago. Hemir the same. Rushin as well. I mean, are we looking? Hemir, is there a world where Hemir comes into the equation a little bit more this season?
I think there should be, because again, it's hard to say without seeing behind the scenes. There were rumours and reports at various times of possibly some poor attitude issues in training with Hemir, which was given as one of the reasons why he maybe wasn't featuring so much. I know Tony Mowbray used to sort of semi-regularly kind of dig him out a bit in press conferences, which it felt a bit bizarre, that, to me at the time. Yeah. But I think when he's been on the pitch, he's shown that he's at least willing to sort of be a focal point. He doesn't mind mixing it with defenders, and obviously you get some absolutely brutal centre-halves in the Championship. I certainly think he should be given a bit more of a chance, but I don't think he's anywhere near ready to lead the line week in, week out.
He sounds like he's got a lot to learn then, Jonny.
Yeah, 100%. He's very raw, and he just doesn't, again, not helped by how sort of erratic we were as a team and a club. I was going to say points last season, the whole season, really. But yeah, I think he needs to do a bit more and show a bit more before you could trust him with being that sort of first name on the team sheet up front. But I think he should be given a chance if he stays around. I also wouldn't be surprised to see him go out on loan somewhere if a suitable option comes up. Yeah. As for the other two, I mean, Mienda
is only 18, 19, isn't he?
Yeah, we saw about 25 minutes of him total before he went off on loan, so you can't really judge him. Again, he looked all right when he came on, but how can you really judge somebody in that short of a sample size? Rusyn's the one I think was the real failure, because by all accounts we'd spent quite a while chasing him, trying to get him to sign, trying to get the deal agreed with his club. I think the last that I heard, I think the fee was somewhere in the region of 2 to 2.5 million. That might include a couple of add-ons, but comparatively for what we've spent on the rest of the squad, that's a lot of money. And I think 2 league goals, I mean, that is a terrible return for a striker. Again, not helped, not given consistent runs in the team, but apparently struggling a little bit with homesickness. Right. And if you're homesick for an active war zone, that must mean a lot.
I was going to say, he's Ukrainian, isn't he? So is there part of it he's on his mind where, has his family back home and all that?
Yeah, and I think it did take a while before I think he's married, so I think it's his wife who he brought over. And I think there was, not sure the reason why, but there was a period of a few months where he was just on his own here before his family did move over. So
that must be the lad.
Yeah, obviously on a human level, I've got nothing but sympathy for him. I mean, just a terrible situation all around. Yeah. But from a footballing point of view, he didn't offer us enough for me to be convinced that he should be a regular starter for us in the coming season. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see him move on. If he doesn't, I'll obviously support him and wish him the best and get behind him every time he is on the pitch. And he scored against Middlesbrough, which always helps, sticking it to them. So, but yeah, I think it's thin on the ground, options up front.
I think, Jonny, I think for any football club or in any industry really, but especially for Sunderland, which is so youth development, I think you've got to put people first, because you put people first, they've got the talent, so the football should sort of stem from there. So I think from Rushin's point of view, I don't know how the club have handled the personal challenges that he may or may not have come across. I don't know, but I my instinct would be try as hard as possible to create a dynamic or a circumstances where Rushin as a person feels valued and supported, and that his family are looked after as much as possible, and that sort of thing is considered, because then you're likely to see the results of that on the pitch in the long term. And I think it's the right thing to do from an ethical point of view. It's also probably helpful from a footballing point of view as well. So I hope that's how the club look at it.
I think Tony Mowbray was actually quite good at that as well when he was in charge. Not necessarily with Rushin specifically, but I think you could tell that all the players, you know, they were always very warm about Mowbray whenever they spoke about him, like in the media. There seemed to be a real good rapport there between the players and the head coach, where I think he really did sort of have that kind of people first approach with them, and that's why I think he got such good results out of them as he did in that first season. So I completely agree with you. I think it's something that's possibly been missing a little bit last season in patches. Hasn't really felt like they've been as together and as unified as they could be. So certainly something that Labree's got to work on. But you know, he's only early days, so let's hope he can show some of that himself.
Dennis Shirkin, Jonny, where's he at the moment? He's had a bit of a troubled time with injuries, hasn't he? A bit like you mentioned with Niall Huggins.
Yeah, thankfully not to the same extent as Huggins, but yeah, it's been so frustrating because he's such a good footballer. Like when he's fit, he just is on the team sheet. Regardless, he will be playing and he'll be starting. He's very reliable, and he offers us something that, particularly just weirdly, Sunderland have struggled with left backs ever since I've been supporting them. Just always struggled. The best left backs we've had have been like loan players like Danny Rose or Marcus Alonso back in the Premier League. We never really have nailed that position down.
Oh, I always liked Patrick Van Aanholt going forward.
Oh, going forward, superb. Just never, ever, ever ask him to defend. Don't ask him to go back. Going forward, superb. But even he's probably like one of the best ones that we've had, and he was only really around for a few seasons. Cirkin seems on paper like he should be the answer to that problem. And on his day, I think he's a player I think could easily play Premier League football given the right environment.
He was so highly rated at Spurs.
Apparently. I remember at the time that loads of Spurs fans who knew anything about their youth teams and age groups, they were all sort of gutted to see him go. It looks, I mean, he seems to be back fit now. I've seen again in the sort of promotional stuff for pre-season, he's there with the lads sort of amongst the main group training on the grass and that, which is fantastic to see because he's had a torrid time of it. And he's been unlucky as well because one of the things that kept him out was concussion when he got punched in the head against Millwall going up for a header. I mean, by the keeper, not just by a random outfielder. But you know, you can't legislate for that. It's not, you can't even really blame the player for fitness issues. The camera doesn't seem to be playing ball.
I said.
No, don't worry, you're not that
bad. We've lost Jonny for a moment there. I'll just kind of come back to that. Yeah, Dennis Shirkin, I think has a huge amount of potential. I also quite like Adji Elise as well. He's another left back that struggled a bit with injuries. Jonny, what do you think of Adji Elise? He can play centre half. I quite like the fact that he's got that flexibility, so he can switch and maybe invert into a back three or something like that in possession. But he can also get forward quite nicely as well.
Oh, 1 sec. It's on.
You're right.
Can you hear us now? Am I back? I'm back.
I can hear you, yeah.
Magic. Right, yes. So, Elise, again, an interesting one. Struggled with injuries, but he looks really, really good when fit. Again, I've seen him on the grass with the lads in the pre-season sort of social media stuff, so seems like getting back on track fitness-wise. He's a slightly strange one because we mainly saw him impress when he came in Cirkin's absence a couple of seasons ago. So then it raises that question a little bit like Pembele and Hume on the other side of sort of how do you actually get them both in the team if they're both fit? And again, if we ended up going to some sort of back three system, he'd slot in nicely on that left-hand side of the three. And you could have Cirkin further up as the wing back even, or something like that. I think what's going to make or break Elise and Cirkin's season, like collectively, is what happens to the other one. You know, if Cirkin gets injured, is Elise fit? If he is, he'll slot straight into the team and he'll have a run. If Elise is injured, is Cirkin fit? He'll be in the team. Happy days. If they get unlucky and they're sort of both fit at the same time or both injured at the same time, that's when you've got problems, because you've either got to try and fit both in or drop one, or if they're both injured, then maybe we're a bit knackered. But both good players. I think Cirkin possibly offers you a bit more going forward. I think Elise offers you a bit more solidity defensively. But both obviously well-rounded, and it's going to be interesting. I would imagine that all things being equal, everyone being fit, Cirkin would be the preferred choice at left back in a 4. And then it's, if you're Elise, you're thinking maybe you can move centrally and play in that 2-man pairing with Dan Ballard. But how do you drop Luke O'Nien because he's the captain? So there's all these questions where it's a nice problem to have, though, because we've effectively sort of got like one too many good defenders to be able to play them all at the same time, which is a heck of a lot better than having one too few good defenders scrabbling around.
It certainly is, Jonny. I'm hearing a bit of hiss back. I don't know if you can fiddle with the settings for a moment. I'm curious about Nectarios Triantis, because he came to Sunderland last year with some rave reviews, and I think there are people who follow the Socceroos, the Australian national team. He said that he has a huge amount of potential. And with Sunderland's audacious developmental policies, I was kind of expecting him to come into the side and possibly stake a claim for himself. But Luke O'Nien started 43 league games again. I mean, he did it in 2023, which was less of a surprise because there were so many injuries at the back. But last season, that wasn't really the case. And still, Luke O'Nien was starting all games. And do you think that was because Triantis didn't develop as you were hoping, or just because Luke O'Nien just has such a winning mentality and such a great mindset, if you like, of attacking any challenge that comes his way, that he's just not willing to let his place go? I mean, is there elements of both there? Does it kind of meet in the middle? How would you look at it?
Yeah, how's the audio now? Is that any better?
That sounds a bit better, thank you.
Yes, the cable's a bit dodgy. Apologies. Perils of live broadcasting there. On O'Nien and Triantis, though, Triantis I definitely think he was possibly less ready for the step up from Australia than maybe the club had anticipated. I think nothing concrete to go off, but I get the feeling they expect him to be able to contribute a little bit more. I mean, he looked okay the few times that he did end up in the team. I think it was against Birmingham, actually, where we ended up having to replace the centre-half partnership after the team had come out because of injuries in the warm-up. And that was the only reason Triantis and Jensen Seelt ended up starting as a pair, I think, for the only time in the whole season. And he looked all right. He played quite well. By all accounts, he actually did all right when he went on loan in the second half of the season up to Hibernian.
Right.
But I think they ended up deploying him as a bit of a holding midfielder towards the end of his spell there, which in a way doesn't surprise us, because one of the big qualities that was talked about when we signed him was that he's very comfortable on the ball, and he's a slightly lighter man. You know what I mean? He's not the sort of big burly traditional football league centre back. So I think possibly moving him a bit higher up the pitch means that he can get on the ball a bit more, and maybe hides a little bit of not a weakness, but maybe an area of his game that's not necessarily a strength. I think there's a possibility that he plays a big role in the team this season now that he's been on loan and had a bit of experience. Because I still think he's a highly rated player by all accounts from what I've heard. But it is an interesting one. With Luke O'Nien, I think he just offers so many intangible qualities to the team that you cannot drop him.
And also, Jonny, as an example, to players we've spoken about, I think it was either Meander or Hemir that we were speaking about in terms of attitude question marks. And it's like, for me, Luke O'Nien is the one you'd want these young players to be able to look up to, because you've not got many of them. Luke O'Nien is the one where it's like he's going to set an exact. I can imagine Luke O'Nien sets his alarm at 5 o'clock every morning and just rushes out of bed straight away. Doesn't need a lie, and he's straight in the gym at 6 a.m. That kind of, gets things done. That's how I picture Luke O'Nien's lifestyle. So again, that's the kind of guy that you want, inspiring and leading everyone else.
Well, the club put a clip on Twitter a couple of days ago of they had the players doing keep-ups with a tennis ball as a little way to promote Wimbledon. Luke O'Nien did, I think, 497 straight keep-ups with a tennis ball, because anything you put in front of him, he's going to attack it like a dog let off the lead for the first time in his life. It's remarkable to see.
Do you know what though, Jonny? It's like I think it's a psychological thing where it's like, if you attack any challenge with the belief that you're going to succeed, you're probably more likely to. And obviously, there's limits to that. But I think it massively helps when it comes to a midfielder filling in at right back, as we saw, I think, in the 2021 season, I want to say, or filling in at centre back. Any job. If Patson got injured, and then your backup goalkeeper,
he'd be the first one to stick his hand up.
Exactly. So it's like, that mentality I absolutely adore, and I think Sunderland need people like Luke O'Nien in their squad and in their dressing room.
Absolutely. I mean, we've always kind of been a fan base where we'll celebrate a big crunch and tackle in the midfield as much as you celebrate a goal almost sometimes. And O'Nien's a kind of player who thrives off that in turn as well. I think you can see that it gets him going when he does something that gets the crowd going. And obviously all players like to see the crowd get up on the feet for them. But I think O'Nien in particular, there's almost a ferocity to the way that he plays, where you can tell he'd almost rather die than not give 100% on the pitch. Which, like you said, I mean, and you don't need to be a big mouth in the dressing room or anything. Just by playing in that way, it's almost by default, it's going to have an effect on the people around you. It's going to force them to raise their game, because, just by watching him when he's on the pitch, you're almost a bit inspired to go and, you want to be matching that level. So I think he's made himself undroppable, basically, partly by that attitude and partly by just being prepared, like you say, to play any position on the pitch. I'm pretty sure in his 6 years at Sunderland, I think he's played right back, left back, centre back, right wing back, left wing back, holding mid, centre mid, and attacking mid. The only positions he's not played is as an out-and-out winger and as a striker. And a goal, obviously. Which obviously it takes skill to do that. You need to be good enough to be able to fill in these different positions, but it just speaks of the mentality, and it speaks of the.
He could probably, I mean, he's not played an out-and-out winger, but he could probably do a job in a 4-4-2 on the right wing. So it's like, he's just.
He absolutely could, 100%. And for a fact, again, if the manager turned around and went, "We're going to play 4-4-2, I need somebody to play on the right wing," he'd be the first one to stick his hand up and say, "Put us there, Gaffer, I don't care." And you need that in a squad, because obviously you want talent and you want, a bit of arrogance with players sometimes to kind of back themselves in the moment, but you also just need those players who are going to just run through a brick wall, because it's going to get dirty, it's going to get tough, you're going to have games where it's not necessarily going well. He'll be there no matter what.
And that's what I think's really exciting for Sunderland, is what you want to do is you want to take these players who are got elite potential and basically O'Nienify them, if you like. You know what I mean? You want to get Luke O'Nien rubbing off on some of these players with elite potential, because then the value goes from 10 million to 30 or 40 million, and that's how you build.
Absolutely. If you could get like a big machine like in a cartoon and stick like Chris Rigg on one side of a conveyor belt, and then he goes through and he comes out on the other. Oh, have I frozen a bit? Can you still hear us?
You've frozen a little bit. I can still hear you.
Right. But you could put Chris Rigg on one side of that and bring him out the other side, and he's being O'Nienified. The club would pay 100 million quid for somebody to build that. You know what I mean?
Totally.
It's absolutely he's basically the gold standard, isn't he, in terms of attitude of where you want a player to be. And as a fan as well, when you watch a player, I'm just going to stop and start the camera. Oh dear, seems technical difficulties. Right. But if you want
to rejoin, and I can hold it for another 30 seconds or so.
Yeah, go on then. I'll be right back.
Yeah. So I think the really important thing for me to focus on is I'd be really interested to see who else comes in as a number 6 for Sunderland, because I think Jay Matete is, I think he's been at Sunderland for a couple of years now. I've always found him to be really tenacious. He's a good ball carrier as well. I could quite like the idea of him as a number 6, but there is a bit of a reliance on Dan Neil, so I think that looks like a priority area. Jonny, how are Jensen Seelt and Joe Anderson developing? I don't suppose you might know much about Joe Anderson, because he hasn't actually played much for the first team in terms of league starts, has he?
Yeah, I think with Anderson, possibly just a case of one of the ones that didn't work out. I think it spoke volumes. I know he'd only just come to the club. I think he joined in the January of the Tony Mowbray season, the playoffs season. But I think it spoke volumes that we had such an injury crisis at the back. We had Anderson who'd come in, who was a centre half, and we were playing like he would rather play players who were like 5'9" out of position as centre backs in big games rather than give Anderson a go. And I don't think that's ever a real vote of confidence, is it? Which
Sure.
I haven't seen loads of him. I know he's been on loan at Shrewsbury, maybe not ripped up any trees while he's been there. So I think possibly just one of those where you got to hold your hands up a bit and say, we took a punt, it didn't work out. Yeah, and I think it might suit club and player, because I don't think I think if he was honest with himself, he'd say, I'm probably not really good enough to start every week for Sunderland.
Okay.
And I think, if he can move on and go to a club where he's going to get that opportunity to play regular football, that's obviously going to be better for his career. And I think, I just don't think we're in a position where we need him in the squad. Seelt, though, is a much different question, because I think he is a very good footballer. I think he's been really unlucky with injury. Did his cruciate at the back end of the season. But he seems to be moving. He's not on crutches or anything. His knee doesn't look very nice when you see pictures of him wearing a pair of shorts. But I think he is certainly going to be in and around the squad from the start of the season by the looks of things. And he is a good player. He proved that. He managed to sort of force his way into the team a bit last season, where obviously from the start of the season it was O'Nien and Ballard preferred as the centre half partnership, but he did manage to force his way in. He got some appearances and he looked good. He looks, I don't think he looks the quickest defender in the world, but he's got a good frame. He's a tall lad. He seems all right in the air, comfortable with the ball at his feet. He was given a bit of a hiding to nothing when he came on at fullback when we were down to 10 men getting smashed 4-0 off Middlesbrough.
Right.
But that to one side, I think he's not like he's never been man of the match when he's played, but he's certainly been a consistently good defender when he's on the pitch. So I think if he stays injury free, and if the cruciate injury hasn't hurt his development too much, I think he is one that we could see quite a lot of this season.
Yeah. So Ballard, Seelt, O'Nien and Triantis are going to be the centre half options if we're looking at a back four then.
So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so Jonny, expectations for this season. I think it's probably a given that you're entitled with a value and quality and talent in this squad. You need to be finishing higher than 16th, and I would dare say a top half finish is going to be the minimum expectation. But I think you're within your rights to feel like you can challenge for the playoffs. Yeah,
I think you pretty much bang on. I think for me personally, above anything, I want to see much better football, because the way we played in the second half of last season, it really got diabolical at times. It was a bad watch. Now that's fine if you're like Gareth Southgate with England and all you're doing is trying to this camera. I'll finish my train of thought.
Do you know what? We've not got long, so we might as well just carry on.
Right, okay. Sorry about that, but
no worries.
The style of football, if you're Gareth Southgate and you're with England trying to win a knockout tournament, fine. Scrape through however you want to. But when you're playing a 46-game season and we as fans, paying money to watch it week in, week out, you just want to see something. We've got a talented group of players. The potential is there for us to play good football. And, I'm not saying we're going to sweep people away every week, but we've got it in us to at least compete. And have an identifiable style. I want it to be consistent. I want to know when I think of what is Reggie Labree's Sunderland, I want to know what that is.
Yeah.
In terms of league position, for me, I think top 10 is probably the bare minimum. I think
Okay.
if we finish any lower than 10th, I think there's going to be serious questions being asked by the wider fan base, and not entirely undeservedly so.
Mhm.
A push for the playoffs would be brilliant. I would love to see it. I do wonder whether first full season is maybe asking a bit much for Labrie to try and take us into the top 6. But obviously, a lot of that's going to depend on what other teams do.
Yeah.
The teams that come down in particular.
You don't quite know as well how quickly some of these players, I mean, there's a world, I think, because of the talent in the squad, that players like Nectarios Triantis, let me go for the obvious ones. So Dan Neil, Joe Bellingham, all develop ahead of schedule, and then some of the younger players really catch fire, if you like, because there is always that possibility. I mean, I think with Anthony Patterson, Tri Hume, Luke O'Nien, Dan Ballard, Dan Neil, Joe Bellingham, Patrick Roberts, and Jack Clark, plus the money for whichever of those, if any, get sold. I think that's a great starting point. And then I think it's about the next 3 or 4 editions. And if you get those right, then you're in with as good a chance of anyone in terms of that top 6.
Yeah, 100%. I think if the transfer window just didn't happen this summer, so we just had the same squad going into the season, top 10, maybe if we get lucky, try and push up. But like what you've just said there, if we do get those additions right and we supplement the quality that's already in the squad with the right players in the right positions, then I think you're right. If it all clicks and it comes together, then the sky's kind of the limit, really, because the talent is so obvious in the squad that we could just go on a run, the kind of run where you just all of a sudden you blink and you go, oh, we're 15 games unbeaten here. Wow, maybe we're actually doing something.
Yeah.
But equally, because we are still a very young squad and everything's just a bit fragile after how badly the second half of last season went. If it turns, it could turn quickly the other way. I think it's gonna hinge a lot on what happens around Christmas when you get that thick and fast run of games. And if you go on a roll, then you've got a game every 3 days and you can kind of build that momentum.
Sure.
If a couple of them go against you, then you don't have a lot of time to put things right. You don't have a lot of time on the training pitch. It could snowball the other way. So for me, that's the crucial period of the season. If we get to sort of February and we're sitting 8th or higher, then I would think, yeah, you know what, we could have a real good go of trying to get promoted this season. It might not come off. It probably wouldn't, because I don't think we are one of the 3 best teams that are going to be in the league, but the potential is definitely there. Equally, if it gets to sort of February time and we're sat 16th again, might be having a different conversation with you.
Sure. So in short then, Jonny, what's the biggest reason to believe that Sunderland can meet their ambitions this season?
It's the squad. It's Jack Clark, Patrick Roberts, Job, Dan Neil, Pierre Echo. We've not really mentioned him a lot, but another with massive potential.
You're a big fan of Pierre, then?
Yeah, I think there's certainly a real player in there. Similar to Dan Neil, I think he suffered a bit by sort of not always having solidity in and around him in that midfield. He's been guilty of that at times himself as well. He's not been the most consistent, but he's definitely got the potential.
He's very energetic, isn't he, Aqua?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and then you've got your Ballards, your Humes, your Serkins, Patterson. That's the biggest reason there is that those players that we already have in the door, we know what they can do. We've seen it.
Yeah, it's like that. There's that core that you know what you're going to get from, and then there's like an endless list of other players who could shoot up ahead of schedule.
Yeah.
Like Chris Riggs, only 17, but he could easily have a massive season, a bit like Jude Bellingham had a couple of years ago. You also got Joe Bellingham there, who again could have a massive season if he has a bit more continuity. So I think there's so many reasons to be excited. Biggest reason for doubt, Jonny?
No striker. Because it crippled us last season. We've struggled to recruit. I mean, everyone struggles to recruit good strikers. I mean, they're like gold dust. If we get that wrong, we're going to be in big trouble. And there are other reasons, things that could go wrong, but for me, that is the big one. If we get that position wrong, we're in for a real struggle.
Okay. Give me a number then, Jonny, between 1 and 10 to denote your level of optimism for the season ahead.
I'm gonna go with an 8. I
8.
think I generally tend to be on the more optimistic side of the Sunderland fan base for me sins, but yeah, I think I am optimistic. We've got everything in place for pre-season to start. Clean slate, good group of players. Yeah, I think things are looking up. I think things are looking good. Obviously, there's that little 2-point room for a bit of doubt there. You know, you never quite know what you're going to get with Sunderland, as I've learned to be peril over the last 25 years. But yeah, I'm optimistic.
Oh, brilliant. Jonny, thank you so much for joining me for your insight from Roker Report. I always enjoy conversations, so thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. Everyone go check out Roker Report as well and follow Jonny at Hawley Jonny on Twitter/X. This has been the Summer Deep Dive on Sunderland here on EFL Debate. Get yourself subscribed on YouTube. Drop us in a comment as well if you're watching this on YouTube to let me know how you think the Mackems are going to get on this season. Or if you've enjoyed this episode on Spotify, please leave us a review because that would help us out a lot. And we'll see you again here on EFL Debate for another Summer Deep Dive very soon.